Today we're here to speak about youth governance and conservation. So, who in the room knows what youth governance means?
Youth governance, I guess to me, means that young people can have their say on a decision that is made that affects potentially young people, but also decisions that affects people more generally. And I think any way that a young person can feed into a decision, I would class as youth governance.
Well said, Jess. That was brilliant. Did it without moving your lips. Yeah, youth governance is pretty much having young people completely embedded in an organisation's decision making and their policies and their rules and procedures and things like that. So now we know what youth governance is, we can start talking about it. So on our panel we have Rob. Rob is one of the public affairs advisors from Chester Zoo. Oh no, we're not clapping. We have Shenona, she's the Vice Chair of the Youth Climate Ambassadors for Wales. And we have Emma Greenwood, a youth voice and climate activist. So we'll just get straight in. What I'm going to do is I'm going to ask 5 questions and then going to open it up. So get thinking if there's anything you want to ask any of our 3 panellists, then fire away. So, Emma, unfortunately, because she sat next to me, I'm going to come to you first. Yeah. So, tell me a bit about you and your experience sort of working with young people and in this sort of bubble.
Yes. So, hello, everyone. I'm Emma Greenwood. I'm an 18-year-old youth voice and climate activist. A lot of my niche started in politics. So, I ran to be the Young Member of Parliament for Bury. And a youth MP represents everyone between the ages of 11 and 18 in their constituency. Sitting on council meetings, run youth councils, and once a year we get to sit on the green benches in the House of Commons. We're the only other people other than the real deal MPs that get to do that. And we get to debate and advise and draft a youth manifesto which advise the national government on what young people want to see. And then as well as that, I do some youth climate activism. So I helped co-found Youth Strike for Climate Manchester, which is the Manchester branch of Greta Thunberg's Fridays for Future strikes. And from that, I've had incredible opportunities to attend COP26 as a delegate from Greater Manchester in the negotiation blue zone, speak at conferences and basically say yes to every email that comes my way to speak at an event and give young people a voice.
Fab, that was lovely. Shenona, same question to you. Tell us a bit about your experience and how you've got to where you are today.
Yeah, I think mine is pretty interesting because, if anything, I joined youth and climate activism by accident. So I was speaking about this a bit earlier, I went to a mock COP that was basically for schools. It was mainly for geography students, but I didn't do geography at the time. I just really liked my geography teacher. So we went to this mock conference. I found it really interesting. So I've always been interested in conservation, wildlife, was debating doing zoology, that kind of stuff. And then I went to this mock COP. And then through that, kind of accidentally applied to be a youth climate ambassador for Wales. But just a little background. So I'm 19. I guess I'm a youth and climate activist. And I'm vice chair and comms officer for the Youth Climate Ambassadors for Wales. And what it was is we're completely youth led. So at this conference, they asked us if we wanted to create something that would have a bit more of a legacy. We were like, oh yeah, sounds cool. And then we got to the meeting, they were like, yeah, we don't want to dictate anything that you guys do. So we decided everything and we were like, yeah, we're all really passionate. We want to do this. So we started meeting fortnightly. We created our own manifesto and this was 2.5 years ago. So since then, we've expanded. We've got a consultation group. We're all over Wales and some of our members have spread out. So I'm now in London. There's one of us in America, but most of the work we do is focused on Wales. So now we do just a bit of everything. So we've branched into more policy. So liaising with the Welsh government. We're part of a cross-party group for well-being and climate. And then we do little things as well. We do events, we do social media campaigns. Our main goal is to empower the youth voice and for accessible climate action on all levels. I think the main thing that we agreed upon was that it's not accessible for young people to fight for when it should be. That's kind of what we do, and I've been extremely lucky with the opportunities I've had too. So I went to COP26 as a delegate as well, and that was incredible. And we've just been expanding and trying to amplify the youth voice as much as we can.
Brilliant. We've had a little bit of a joke in the office about inviting Rob because, as you can tell, he's quite a lot older than the other two, and we haven't let this slip. So, Rob, same question to you.
So I'm going to age myself right at the start and say I've been involved in politics since 2010 when I was 18. So it's been a while. Back then, I supported Nick Clegg and his campaign. That's when he was an MP, not a owner of Facebook. But I studied animal science at college. I left there and I thought that was the last time I was going to work in the animal world. I started work on the referendum back in 2016 before going into local government, where I worked on a community engagement campaign, and then worked in Parliament for a few years supporting government ministers and backbenchers on all things DEFRA, animal welfare, animal science, zoo welfare, that sort of thing. I swapped one zoo for another 12 months ago and came here, where I work in the public affairs team. So who here has heard the term lobbyists before? Does anyone know what a lobbyist is? So we don't use the L word because it sounds a bit evil, but we say influencers. So we're the old-fashioned influencers. The zoo has a vast range of expertise. There's lots of people that work here that know lots of different bits and pieces about lots of amazing things. So we use that knowledge and expertise to try and influence government policy. So we bring in members of Parliament. Very recently we had Sir Lindsay Hoyle, the Speaker of the House, in, and he met with a number of different people at the zoo. We were able to talk to him about why conservation is fantastic. We also get MPs in to meet with our youth board members. So Izzy had lunch with Sarah Brickliff, who's a local MP, the youngest Conservative MP, I think she was 26, younger than me, wow. So we were able to have those conversations and really push why young people should need to be empowered to be involved in sort of the conservation world. And one of the really proud successes we have had was to get the youth board involved with the DFE consultation, which Connor mentioned earlier in his workshop as well. So we were one of the only, through the youth board, the zoo was one of the only organisations in the country to be asked about DFE's sustainability and climate change strategy, which is really going to empower young people through the education system. So, yeah.
Looks like I've slid your tenner there to mention the youth board as many times as you can. But I haven't. It's the same kind of theme as yesterday with our careers and conservation panel. Like, the journey to getting involved in youth governance isn't linear. I said yesterday, a wiggly waggly worm, and then I just cringed immediately. Like, why on earth did I say that? It was so much. I'm not going to say that today. But it's not like one job fits all. It's like all jobs can be linked to youth governance in some way. So I suppose that leads on to the next question nicely. So why is youth governance and hearing youth voices really important? So Shenona, I'll go to you first.
Okay. It's a difficult question, isn't it? Because it's like difficult to answer and yet it feels so obvious. Like, I was saying this before, to me, it never made sense that only one demographic or only one group of people gets to make decisions for everybody. So yeah, that kind of thing. And obviously my background, what I'm most passionate about is climate action. And that is going to affect like future generations more than anyone else. And yet when we went into this group, because I had very little background knowledge, but we all went into this group with the same idea of like, but why do we feel like so powerless? Because, you know, at that age, I think I was 16 when it started. Like, I couldn't vote. I still lived at home. Like, my school didn't even recycle, like stuff like that. But then we came together and we realized that we all had extremely good ideas. And then once you start talking, I feel like on a level, like on the same level, once you start talking about things in a real way, we realized that we had really good ideas and like we knew what we were doing, which is why like I think so many youth activists are pushing for more involvement, because we know what we're doing. And I think like that's the hardest thing for other people to see, is like we're not just like passionate kids who are like excited about animals. Like, we know what we're saying, we have extremely good ideas. But I think it's the same for any age group. Like, I just feel like it would be quite silly to ask like, why do adults get to vote? But it's the same, like everyone should have the same opportunities. So yeah.
Yeah, definitely. I think a lot of people like couldn't vote at the time when like big decisions were happening, like for Brexit. Like, who in the room was old enough to vote for Brexit when it happened? A few, not many though. And then it's like, yeah, it's affecting all of us now. So, yeah, definitely. Emma, why do you think that hearing youth voices is important?
I think a lot of my angle, and when I was involved in Youth Voice in the Northwest, I had this youth worker who used to say, like, young people are experts at being young people, and it is so true. There's such a big divide at the moment, for better or worse, between the generations. And so by missing out, sort of like that under 18 demographic, you've missed out on a whole cohort's views and opinions. And decisions are made, for better or worse, that then negatively impact that generation. And then you get kind of people who are angry, and you just get this really discontent society. And for my opinion, and for my experience anyway, politics has only ever been made stronger by bringing young people into that conversation. Whether it's scrutinising MPs who've previously got away with some dodgy things, or whether it's sort of bringing voices into the conversation which have previously been marginalised. I think there's this awareness that we have as young people about inclusivity and bringing people into the conversation that only ever strengthens politics. And I'm just really passionate that sort of like, you don't have to have a degree, you don't have to have done a certain thing or being a self-identified activist in order to enter these spaces. Like, just your presence and the fact that you take up space on the earth means you have a right to have a say in what it looks like in the future and what it looks like now. And so I just think that even though legally they try and set these barriers around like voting age, around kind of laws around protesting and making that stricter, I think we need to take up that space and own it, because we have a voice and we can't just kind of take it that people are going to say, no, you don't deserve to use it until you're this age, which just seems kind of so performative in its nature.
Yeah, a lot of people say like, oh, what's one vote going to do? Like, one vote won't make the difference. But my sister lives in Sheffield, and the Conservatives got in by 2 votes. So if 2 more people went, it would have changed it to Labour. So yeah, definitely go and vote if you can. Rob, why do you think hearing young people's voices is important?
I mean, she's been summed up perfectly by my other 2 panellists. But I think good youth governance, and I think this event has shown today, has that opportunity to show that young people's voices, they're not less important and they're not less impactful than maybe older people like myself. You guys, it's really cliche and a bit cheesy, but you guys are the future. So it's really important that you're in the room as well, talking about the changes that you want to see and the things you want to improve. And I think members of Parliament coming here and really like meeting with the youth board and really getting involved with the work that you guys do just goes to show how impactful that youth governance can be. And if more people get involved with that, then I think it'll be absolutely fantastic.
Fab. How many people in the room have heard the phrase like, you are the future, the youth are the future? Put your hands up. A lot of people. And how many people have felt a hell of a lot of pressure that you're now responsible for it? Exactly. Yeah, definitely. Fab, thank you. So we've talked about like how you've got involved and like why it's important, but what are the biggest challenges you face? So Rob, I'll come to you first. What's the biggest challenges you face like working in this area, and how have you managed to like overcome them?
I think I'm going to talk about myself from about 10 years ago, but there are definitely accessibility issues with getting involved in youth politics, youth governance politics at a young age. Young people, especially working class background people, they go to college, they have second jobs, they have third jobs, they're trying to make ends meet, and they haven't got that opportunity or time to maybe get involved with a campaign or an issue that they really, really care about. But I think it's about, you need to find that time, and it's really important that young people do find an issue that they care about and try and fit that into their lives, even if it's just going home and talking to your friends or your family about that issue and just promoting sustainability or the environment or animal welfare, whatever it is that you care about. And then there's also, I think what I found personally as well, there's this common misconception when I got to my sort of early 20s and I was working in Parliament, that you can only get into politics if you've gone to Oxbridge or Durham, and it's just not the case. So in my first job, I felt really, Sophia earlier was talking about imposter syndrome, and I felt that massively because I was in a room with 10 people, and out of the 10 of them, I think 6 of them went to Oxbridge, 2 went to Durham, and my university wasn't in the top 100, let alone the top 10. But I think everyone deserves to be where they get to, and it's about just persevering and really like pushing what you want to do. And I think everyone can sort of reach their goals if they work hard enough. So I think my message is just keep going, don't stop. If you know what you want to do, just set your targets and work towards it.
Fab, thank you. I feel like if we all had a pound for every time we'd heard the phrase imposter syndrome these past 2 days, we definitely wouldn't still be sat in this room. Yeah, definitely. Emma, let's go to you. What are the biggest challenges that you've faced and how have you overcome them?
I think my biggest one's probably been opposition, if not downright like people shutting you down, especially adults. I remember when we did one of the first youth strikes, there was a local newspaper in Manchester, which I won't name, which basically did, I was going to say, no. They basically did a huge slate of like just young people, especially like youth activists and people making noise. And it was like a huge public like shame in it, felt like, of young people. And I was 16 at the time, and it was just a really big blow, which was really difficult to deal with. And again, I think I attribute a lot of my getting through that to like the power of networks and the fact that I wasn't alone in that. We were a team of like 20 other young people, and we were all like, no, they're just reinforcing the status quo because that's what their readers want to see. Like, that isn't, we're doing something and we believe that we need to do it. And the same things happen with like some MPs, really progressive, love listening to young people, like Sir Lindsay Hoyle, absolutely great. We've met him in the past. But equally, there's some MPs that are, I think they're genuinely scared of young people. Like we scare them because we hold them to account. We're not scared to call them out. And so that fear makes people really hostile sometimes and really angry. And so I think sometimes as a young person to have all the pressures of society telling you to be quiet, take your usual place, which is, in a corner somewhere, lower down the corporate ladder, like to actively go against that and then stick your head like out of the sand and put your head above everyone else's. It's a really scary thing to do. And I think like you have to have the people around you to support you, and you have to have this really deeply embedded self-belief that you're raising your voice for a reason and you have to keep going. But I think equally it's giving yourself credit that if some days when you've got low self-esteem, which I think like we all have from time to time, it's going, right, maybe today I can't do this, and taking a step back, and that is completely fine as well. But it's being aware of that pressure and the fact that what you're doing is actually pretty extraordinary, even though it's so easy to take it for granted because you see other people doing it, and sort of telling yourself that like we are changing the world in essence, and that's a pretty big deal. So be gentle with yourself, and don't listen to the haters, as they always say.
I think that's such great advice. Like, be gentle with yourself. You see a lot of pressure, and like if you're not getting the results you want and you want to change the world, that's such a huge thing to do. Like if you can do one tiny little baby step, like just baby steps, keep it all in perspective, and then you can look back and think, do you know what, we actually have done some really cool stuff, and we actually have made a little difference. Definitely. Shenona, what about you? What are the challenges that you've faced, and how have you overcome them?
Yeah, this question, like when I read it, I was like, oh, okay. Like, I'm very passionate about this, especially because we've been youth-led from the beginning. So I feel like everything we faced was like, not to be dramatic, but was like heightened because no one was really telling us what to do. No one was telling us, like, no one was really there to guide us. And yeah, again, not to be over dramatic, but I actually feel like as a youth activist, it felt like everything was like made to be the opposite of how we wanted it to be. It was like pitted against us. Like just to reiterate what you were saying, like almost the first year of our youth activism, we would only get invited to things as like a token young person. They wouldn't listen to us. They just keep like reiterating the phrase that was like, oh, you are so passionate, but blah blah blah. And you're like, okay, why are you talking to me then? Like things like that. And then the same thing, like you constantly feel like everything is your fault. So I think especially the way that people target young people, it's like, oh, okay, you can't make political decisions, you can't do big things, but like individually you can just do it yourself. But that is extremely like scary. Like it gives you, like climate anxiety. So I remember especially after COP, me and the chair of my group had to have a phone call being like, it is not all our fault. Like, it's not on us. Like, we can do what we can, but then we need to stop. Because, we were extremely, like, emotional because it's difficult. And I think the biggest thing as well is that young people feel like they can't bring it up. So they'll be called, like, like it doesn't matter, like, you can just go back to school, or, like, it's not your place. Like we felt wrong for being so passionate about it, especially because there is still like this shift in mindset that needs to happen in like everyday society, even in young people. So at school, I used to get teased for liking climate action, for being passionate about climate action. I would like every week I would hear the phrase like, oh, but it's just the weather. I was like, oh no. Yeah, so things like that, like it can get extremely stressful, and like I think the biggest thing is that you feel extremely powerless. But like you said, I think the main thing is like finding that balance and finding like people and things that comfort you. So we've had a few members who've like just had to take a couple months off, and like that's fine. And yeah, like talking to people. And I say it like almost every time I talk, but like finding an activism that suits you. You don't need to go out and do protests if they make you uncomfortable, or you don't need to write to MPs if you don't want to speak to MPs. Like you can do exactly what makes you comfortable, and that's still as important. So like if you're not on TV, that doesn't mean that you're not an activist. Yeah, I think that's what I would say, like give yourself credit where it's due.
Yeah, definitely. Who in the room has ever felt burnt out while like trying to campaign and trying to push for something or push for change? Yeah, quite a lot of people. And it's sad that when you do, like when you are so passionate about something and you just get pushed back, and it just like, it's what we were talking about yesterday about having to like keep the resilience and just try and keep fighting for the good cause. Who in the room has also felt like they've just been at an event or been put in front of a decision maker just so they can tick a box to say like, we've got young people involved? Yeah, quite a lot of people as well. I think that's one of the worst things. Like we're so lucky as a youth board that the zoo wanted us and are so like open to change, but I feel like it's not the same with every organisation, and it is. I've been involved in some where they said like, oh, it's co-led, and really they've created the programme and then just given it to the young people to deliver, and it's like, well, that's not co-led, is it? Like, stop lying. There was I was speaking to one of our trustees about this last week. This trustee could be 104 years old, like he is old, and he was saying like, I wonder if there's a term like greenwashing that's like youth washing, that is like people that are just going out there and saying they've got young people involved when they haven't. And I thought, yeah, exactly that. There probably will be. No one tell Risa said that he was 104 years old, by the way. Fab. So you've all mentioned about like getting people in front of like MPs and decision makers like in the paper or on TV. So how do you think you would go about that? If someone in the room wanted to get in front of these people and try and make a change, how would you go about that? Rob, I'll come to you first. You deal a lot with MPs.
The most important thing anyone can do is vote. So if you live in Chester and there's an upcoming by-election, regardless of if you're a red, a blue, a yellow, a green, whatever, just go out there and use your vote, because it does make a difference. And as Izzy said, you have times where candidates win by a couple of votes and your vote wouldn't have made a difference. Yes, it probably would have. And it does send a message. So that's the most important thing. But regardless of whichever way you vote or your political persuasion is, I think the biodiversity crisis is going to affect all of us. The climate crisis as well is going to affect all of us. It doesn't matter where you sit politically. So just find a way to get involved. And if you are comfortable writing to your MP, write to your MP. And I'm sure through the youth board, they can help find ways for you to do that as well, and we can support that as public affairs of the zoo as well through the youth board. So write to your MP and as I say, find a cause that matters to you and really do start pushing that cause, even if it's just having conversations with your friends or at home with your family. Everyone can make that tiny bit of difference. So if you can do it, then do it.
Does everyone in the room know who their MP is? If Rob says write to your MP, put a show of hands, everyone who knows who their local MP is. Okay, some, yeah, not everyone. Rob, is there any tips to find out where you can find your MP?
Very good question, probably.
You can go on the website, Who Works For Us. That's a really nice website, and it tells you exactly like their name, like what party they're from, and like what they've voted for in the past.
If you do search Who's My MP, there is a government website that comes up, and you can just pop in your postcode and it'll flash up, and They Work For You tells you how they've voted in the past, so you can find out if you're MP is pro-climate change. Pro-climate change is not the right term I'm looking for, but you know what I mean. So you can do that research, and that gives you that good start. But definitely write a letter to them. It does make a difference. I worked in Parliament for a number of years, and one thing you hear about is MPs saying, "Oh, I've received 2,000 letters in the last week about X, Y, and Z. You know what? I'm going to have to do something about this because I've received such a huge amount." So it does really make a difference. And I'm sure the youth board can help facilitate any sort of letter writing attempts that you make as well.
Fab, thank you. Shenona, what about you? Like if you wanted to you said like not everyone wants to be on TV, but if you do want to get on radio or in the paper or what, like how would you go about, or are there different routes you can take to be in front of these more influential people?
Yeah, it's a good question. It makes me a little upset though, because young people shouldn't have to like fight their way into these positions. Like these politicians, these decision makers should be giving young people the space. So that would be my first thing. Like, don't be afraid to tell them like you should really be having some young people on board. Like, this is not fair. Yeah, so that's my first piece of advice. Almost like I feel like it's easy to feel, like I said before, like it's your fault that you're not there, but it's not. Like there should be things in place for young people. But yeah, there are so many routes. So yeah, writing to your MP is brilliant. I have never done. I'm so scared to write to my MP. I'm not going to do it.
What scares you about that?
I don't know.
Because you just don't know what to do, or?
I think so. I think it's very like personal, isn't it? And like, yeah, I think I just don't really, I feel like I'm going to get ignored anyway, so.
Who else in the room, if they know who their MP is, wouldn't write to them because they don't know what to say? Or they won't get worried they won't get a reply? Okay, yeah.
Just outed myself.
Phew. No, it's fine. Everyone in the room's feeling the same. Like, we need someone to say it.
But yeah, joining a youth group is an incredible way to do it, or forming a youth group, your school, literally anything. You can write to your head teachers. Like, it really does, like, it can start small. Like, it can be anything. Because like I said, we've been in quite a few media interviews now, and most of it has been like, that wasn't our goal. Like, our goal was to empower young people and to like reach for accessible climate action. And just because we were like so passionate and we were trying all these different things, like we just got a bit of attention. So yeah, so there's a lot of things I would say, like, firstly, doing your own research and like learning yourself, making sure you're making educated choices. It can be really difficult, but I think it's a really important step to make. But yeah, like it's important to not constantly feel like you have to be making perfect choices. Especially like, because I'm a student living alone now, like my choices are not the best all the time. But that kind of thing. And yeah, social media is extremely important. Using that, don't be afraid of like, it took me a while to start posting about climate action, all of that stuff, because I was so scared of judgment. But like, if you're passionate about it, go for it. And everyone should be passionate about it. Yeah, so social media is a big one. And then, yeah, just like almost like taking every opportunity you can get. But yeah, like if the media reaches out to you, like if you have a local newspaper, just organising like litter picks. I'm just going to start listing things off now. Litter picks, planting a tree, all those kind of things. But yeah, I think it's all about like, yeah, like you said, finding what works for you and then going with it, and like not letting other people tell you like that's not working or like you should do this instead. I always use this like case study. There was this, I think he was 12 at the time. He really liked playing football, but there was also a lot of deforestation happening in his area. So he got like his community to donate every time he scored a goal. And then he made a charity. So now every time these group of kids score a football goal, somebody plants 2 trees. So it's like literally anything can become like action. I think that's really important to remember.
Yeah, that's such a wholesome thing we spoke about yesterday. No matter what job you have, you can always link it back some way. Yeah, and Emma, if I come to you, what advice will you give to people to get them in front of decision makers, MPs, mayors, anyone with some power?
I addressed this in a little session I did earlier, and I said like my MP that I've got now is maybe not quite as accessible to young people as the other one. I said like you get what you get with MPs, and it is true sometimes. And honestly, I completely understand your bit about like not writing to your MPs. Like if I wrote to my MP now, I wouldn't, because it doesn't feel like a safe option in a sense. Like it's a lot of drilling the marker. It's a nice like it's a lot of energy to do that, and it can be really emotionally draining. And equally, like it can lead to burnout if you're constantly sending all these letters, emails, you get no response. So sometimes it's okay to go like, that just isn't the best thing for me to do in this scenario that I've got and the context, and that is completely fine. And so, like you said, it's finding what works for you. And like I know a lot of people here are under 18, but if you know anyone that is like 11 to 18 age bracket, the UK Youth Parliament is such a, I'd say it's one of my best life experiences so far in terms of educating young people, empowering them, and giving them opening a door for them, which you just don't tend to get normally. So yeah, I'd say shout about that as much as you can.
Fab. Perfect, that's brilliant. Rob, I feel like you need to be writing down, like, write a template on how people can write to their MP. I feel like that would be really handy. Fab. So I'm going to shut up now and I'm going to open the floor. Does anyone have any questions for our panel? Who's going to go first? Go on. Go on, Shenona.
Yeah, it's really difficult. So I'm at university now as well. I actually have never spoken to my university about anything environmental. I don't think they would even, they don't even read my emails about university. So, but I think it's a tricky one because you want to be passionate. So I would make sure that you're clear cut, don't try and sell yourself short just because you want to appease to them. But it's really tricky, balancing that with you have to, it sounds really annoying, but especially when I've been talking to these Welsh politicians, you kind of have to stay on their good side, because once they think that you're, I guess, a nuisance, they're not going to want to talk to you. But I would just keep going. It sounds really annoying, but keep trying at it. Try different things. So maybe if you have office hours, going to them, or if you have other societies or other groups of people, joining together is a really good way of doing things. So even if it's not an environmental society, if it's if you have any human rights societies or debate, SOG, politics, literally anything like that, just pitch something and then you can start small and go bigger. So you can say that you want to put up posters and then be oh, and now we want to do this. So I mean, building it up, and then the university will realize that you guys are doing a good thing, and that you are gaining good traction, that you can post it on social media, and then they will if anything, it's really annoying, but young people almost have to beg for respect, which we shouldn't have to, but they'll see you for what the hard work that you're doing. But well, it's really nice that you're trying to do this, so keep going. And I'm sure you'll get there.
I think you've summed that really nicely, but Emma, Rob, do you have anything else to add?
I left university 10 years ago. So no, but in all seriousness, student unions are probably a good way of going about it. Do they still exist? Are they still a thing? Yeah. Get in contact with student union back in the...
Mine does not answer emails, though.
I know, yeah. It's,
Go and hand it to them in person then.
Yeah.
I don't know, maybe they're a good way forward to get in contact with a sustainability rep or whoever is that representative on the union. But don't stop. Just keep pushing your agenda. As you said, it's really important and you just keep going.
Can I just add one thing? It sounds really silly, but I found some faculty members, even when I was back at school, they're not even related to environmental stuff, but you can reach out to them and some of them by chance will just be very receptive, and then you can work with them to help you. So if you have anyone in your course or people that are quite enthusiastic about these kind of things, contact them maybe.
I think just one final point for me is all universities, most universities have some sort of sustainability plan now as well. So I'm sure someone would have sort of drafted that and created that. So perhaps that's the person you need to sort of clamp down on.
Do you have anything else to add to that, Emma?
I was just going to say about allyship, and I think that's how I did it at my high school. There was nothing before. They were going no, so we don't have the money, we don't have the resources to an eco council. And me being this really, I think I was 14 at the time, I really wanted one. And so one of my geography teachers who you said, I absolutely loved. He was so nice, and he was he was really empathetic to it. And so he basically gave up his free time to set it up. And there is always that one person with a niche who is personally really invested in it. And they'll know someone else maybe who's a bit more senior up who will have a disposition for it as well. And eventually you do end up getting to the top where there's someone quite senior who has the backing of other teachers and realise it isn't just them, has this validation to sort of carry on going. So I'd say, look for allies wherever you can, and follow every little lead.
Fab. Does that answer your question? Perfect. Any more questions?
This is a really good question, and it's something that our group has struggled with, especially keeping up with diversity, because we knew it was important, but we were but how do you do it? Especially how do you reach out and engage with people that aren't engaged for whatever reason, whether it's inaccessible or they just don't care, they still need to be involved. So it's really difficult. Something that I think is overlooked, which is the main point I want to make, is that sometimes giving up your place for someone else is extremely important. So yeah, it's like sometimes you have to use your own voice to amplify others. That's important. But you have to, I feel like some people don't notice when someone else needs to be at the table too. So, for example, we gave some of our COP26 passes to Indigenous people because they don't get passes. And that was actually, it's just something you wouldn't notice. It was quite upsetting for us to have to give up something like that. But we were we had to check ourselves and be no, they need to be there. So I think it's knowing, when to use your voice for others and then when to let someone else have that space, if that makes sense. I think that's the one point that I really want to drive.
Fab. Emma, do you have anything to add to that?
I was going to say mine would be calling out when they're making assumptions about things. And I used to sit on council meetings when I was a youth MP, and they'd go right, we're going to give 16 to 18-year-olds free swimming on a Saturday and Sunday. And I was I don't think this focus. I think a lot of the people in council is 60 plus. A young person is 40. And they just made so many assumptions about what young people. I think young people want this and they need this. And I was no, they need to be able to afford the public transport to get to the pool in the first place. There's so many more primary concerns, and it was just this complete lack of awareness that there is in fact a generational divide, and what they think young people want was often very different to what they actually wanted. And so it's basically, if somebody in a meeting is making an assumption going, right, I want to do this for young people, it's going, right, have you spoken to any young people in that age demographic you're trying to positively impact? And it's again, I think it's campaigning for that young person engagement and consultation while the decisions are being made, because far too often we'll be in the youth council and the council go, right, we've made this decision, what do you think? And I'm you've already made the decision, we're not going to change anything now. And it is that bit of campaigning for youth voice involvement throughout the entire process, rather than it just being a little add-on at the end of this really long process. So it's just constantly checking what's happening and making sure that the right stakeholders are engaged and involved and giving them that platform.
Perfect. Rob, do you have anything else to add?
Probably not on that one. No, but
At least you're honest.
It probably is that engagement is really important, just to have that constant engagement with young people. I'm probably guilty of it myself. You think, oh yeah, I know what young people want, so we'll do this, forgetting that I'm no longer, I am a young person coming towards the end of that time. So I think that constant engagement is sort of the key to it.
Fab. Thank you. Any more questions from anyone, for any of our panel? Yeah, Rob, go on, you go first.
So I was having this conversation yesterday, actually. One of the biggest events of the year coming up is COP15. And it's really important for biodiversity that we get a good deal for nature. But actually, equally as important as people outside sort of our bubble don't understand what COP15 is, let alone care about the agreement itself and what that means. So I think the number one thing that we have to do first is to educate people. And I think young people have that, are really well positioned who are in the conservation sector to educate people about the wider issue and why we need to care about these subjects. So I think it all comes back to that engagement and talking to people and just making sure, even if it's just a tiny conversation you're having with someone, that actually you're pushing that message as to why COP15, for example, is really important and that we should care about that.
How many people in the room, if they were went and told their grandparents or the neighbour about COP15 and why it was so important, would they understand it? How many people, put your hand up if you think people would understand it? Put your hand up if you think they wouldn't understand it. Exactly. Do you have anything else to add? Go on, Emma, you go first.
I think we did, during lockdown, we did some training with the Quakers, and they had this really interesting programme on engaging different stakeholders. And one of the things they said was, you're going to have people who are active oppositions. These are people that actively work against you, actively want to invalidate what you say. Don't waste your energy trying to win them over, because it's not going to happen. Something in them is telling them they want to disagree with you, and they're pretty blindly set in that. And sometimes you have to prioritise where you're putting your energy, and that could be such a big bloodletter of it, and you get nothing out of it. And it's identifying this really nice sweet spot of people who already want to support you, and then you can educate them. But also these people in the middle who aren't actively against you, but they just don't really care that much. And it's identifying them and making it relatable to them. And sort of showing them why it's important and why they need to get involved, but equally understanding that if you spent 6 months trying to convince this group and they're just so set on not believing you, not doing it, not supporting you, that's okay. Maybe in a few months' time, a few years' time, let it sink in, then they will. But sometimes it's okay to give in that sense, and people are going to be against you, and I think that's inevitable, and you don't have to win everyone over all the time is probably my thing.
Definitely. Shenona, do you have anything else to add?
Yeah, I think just something quite important, because this is an issue that we have all the time, especially because our little slogan is like accessible climate action for all, but then like the only people who engage with us is like people who are like us, which is not what we really want. I think what we discovered is that you kind of have to accept that there are barriers for a lot of people. So like for a lot of people, climate action like just can't be on their mind. Like they have a lot of other things to struggle, like to deal with, you know, like lower income families. Like there's so much going on, and we're thinking obviously there's not much that young people can do, which is why it's so difficult. But there has to be these like incentives. So it shouldn't be that everybody has to make these tiny choices that make life harder or like make things more expensive just to make the ethical choice. These things should be in place. So I think it's also like pushing for change to happen that will make even those who will never like listen to you do it anyway. Because, you know, like if, for example, if you made recycling compulsory, like they would just have to do it. So I think it's a mixture of like engaging those who you can, you know, through social media, through having like open discussions. I think it's really important to acknowledge that like sometimes you're just not going to have, like you said, you're not going to have the same opinion, but that doesn't mean that you guys can't fight the same fight. Like you can be on completely different political views. It's like our group stays apolitical, even in meetings. Like you can have different views, you can still want the same end goal. I think it's a mixture of that and fighting for people to make change so that like we don't have to keep pestering every single person, if that makes sense.
Fab. Any more questions? Do you want to start that off, Emma?
Definitely. I mean, like, way too common. It is sometimes speaking to MPs is like talking to a brick wall, which is really, really emotionally draining. I remember there was this one MP who I was so like convinced I was going to win over at this conference. I kept speaking to them. They were being really like, they were listening to me, being really sympathetic. And when I got to the end, and he was like, "But I still just don't agree with you." And I was like, I think sometimes you have to take a step back and go, this MPs are often quite stubborn people as well, very set in their ideological views. Some of them aren't, that's generalisation, but I think some people are so set in their ways and you're not going to win them over. And I think sometimes that's a much bigger fight than just you alone can do. And that's where I think sometimes getting behind an organisation, whether it's like Friends of the Earth or whether it's Amnesty International, and standing with this collective to argue or, you know, campaign that MP rather than doing it on your own, I think is a much more effective way for you emotionally. So I think like sometimes you have to realise and take a step back and go, this just isn't working anymore, and that's okay. So instead I'm going to approach this path where I stand with other people and do it in that way. But equally, if there's an MP that you think, right, you know, they're on the edge, they're sort of like empathising, I can see how they're voting, like go and speak to them and do it that way, and just kind of invest, I think, your individual time in the ones you are reasonably sure are going to have an outcome. Because if not, you get burnout and then you're pretty ineffective anyway. And so it's being quite self-aware, I think, and having that balance in check.
Rob, I don't know whether you've got anything else to add to that. Day in, day out, you're trying to convince MPs to be on our side.
That is the job of the public affairs team, is to talk to those MPs that won't change their minds. And it is a very difficult question because on one hand, you want to engage with as many politicians as possible, but on the other hand, they're not going to change their mind anyway. What's the point? But I think it's about just having those conversations, even if they don't seem that receptive, they'll go away, and hopefully one day in their mind will be like, oh, I remember having that conversation with someone about this topic, and it's set in their head. And the more people that have those conversations with them, the more it will be set in their head. And I think, yeah, if there are organisations that you can join as a collective, that does make a difference. Just recently, during the last government, we've had so many these days. So the one we've just had, the Trust government, there was concerns about the way the government were going on the environment, for example, and a lot of NGOs, environmental organisations came together and they wrote a collective letter highlighting these concerns to the government. And actually it was really, really impactful because there were so many. I think it was 10 million members combined in the end. So it was a lot of people signed up to these letters. And ultimately it was fracking that brought down the last government. So you can say it was positive and it did work. Yeah.
Fab. Shenona, do you have anything to add to that?
Yeah, especially with decision makers and politicians, I think it's a quite unique situation where even if they're not agreeing, it's a little bit sneaky, but they're in a position where they have to appeal to the majority. So if they're not agreeing with you, if you hold them accountable, you know, like if, for example, if you do, so we've had the chance to interview people and they've said things that they've committed to things, they've just said it in an interview. So like if you hold them accountable and if you work almost not on them, but on like getting everyone else there so that they have to change their mind. Because if they don't agree, but everyone else agrees, them going against it makes them look worse. So yeah, so that's quite a unique thing to politicians and decision makers. Like they have to go with what the crowd is going with if they want to stay there. So even if it's not working, I feel like fighting the cause anyway, even if like maybe don't fight with them, but doing it anyway, they're going to have to change their mind eventually. Like even if it's not their opinion. I think that's something to remember. Like you don't have to be changing everyone's mind to make a big difference.
Can I just add as well that you don't always have to, although you should in practice contact your local MP. There are some very good environmental MPs out there who will listen to other concerns as well. Caroline Lucas obviously being one really good example, and she's always open to talking to other people about these issues. So.
Fab, do you have anything else to add?
I was just going to say, like, building on from your point, public accountability for MPs is a huge one because MPs are deathly scared of cancel culture. I mean, cancel culture in itself is questionable, but there is this thing, like, as young people where we're quite good at calling people out, and because we're not scared of that, MPs are scared of that, like, being broadcast. If it picks up that young people speak and, like, were you ignored by this MP? Like, so was I. And as soon as that gets online and it gets traction, they get very scared very quickly. And I think in essence, that can be quite a positive thing sometimes. If you do just sometimes like take to social media and go, this MP is actively ignoring us and actively working against us. Again, there's this certain level of like peer pressure and social expectation that their job, they're like literally paid to listen to you. Whether like if you're a constituent, even better, but they're paid to listen to you as a public representative. And like they should be doing that. And so don't be scared if somebody isn't and you're reaching that quite a lot to then go and take social media and go and call them out. And don't be afraid to do that.